keep shifting that way as much as you can a little bit. And we'll keep going. And then we can put a few more back there, and then we'll go to the next line up.
Should we go?
You gotta make a single lane.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks, guys.
So go ahead and keep shifting out.
Phones off, ringers off.
Ooh, good boy.
You can move, several of them hold.
Yeah. And then if people, if you guys can shift that way as well, try to get everyone in. It'll be tight.
We got room.
Well, you gotta have room for the three
Okay.
members who
Oh,
are
yeah.
gonna be there.
We're gonna close that door, so kind of move forward, and then we'll close our windows again.
We're gonna be staying right here, Harrison.
You guys all right?
Push this a little bit, shut it. Just hang tight, we're gonna shut the door, you'll be able to get behind it.
Okay, you got, this is space for the members. This one,
It's for the what?
for the members.
Oh, okay, I see, I see.
Okay?
Phones off.
I want to thank all of you for being here with us today. I hope that as the women come in, I hope your heart hurts. They're not just victims, they are survivors. And what's most important is to know that we are going to do whatever we can to make sure that the door to justice opens for them, because it was shut. For some, you may say it was shut intentionally, and I would tend to agree with you. I want to thank you all for being here to discuss AB 1510, which will provide a critical window of time for survivors of former USC gynecologist George Tyndall to have their day in court. I'm Eloise Reyes. I'm the Assembly member representing the 47th Assembly District in San Bernardino County. I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm also a proud Trojan. I'm an ally of those who are facing harassment, who have faced harassment, and I stand with them. In May of 2018, the LA Times broke the story of a cover-up by USC regarding sexual misconduct of student patients by Tyndall while employed by the university at its Student Health Center. After the university's investigation, USC quietly paid Tyndall to go away, but failed to disclose information about the findings of their investigation to students, to the Medical Board of California, or to law enforcement. Tyndall started at USC in 1989, and over the years, it is estimated that over 14,000 female students were impacted by Tyndall. Although legislation was passed last year that extends the statute of limitations for damages of sexual assault to 10 years, that legislation is not retroactive. This means that the survivors behind me will be left without recourse, and that's not justice. As a woman, as women, we are keenly aware of the pervasive culture that fails to value and protect women, a culture that lives in the shadows and thrives off of fear. This culture was unfortunately extended to the most intimate part of our lives, at student health centers, where the sacred patient-doctor relationship was violated. Standing with me are numerous women, all survivors of sexual behavior, sexual assault, sexual harassment, who are here to speak their truth. The truth is that sexual assault, harassment, and any pervasive behavior anywhere is never, never okay. The legislature has taken critical steps in the last year to address harassment and further movements like #MeToo and Time's Up. But today we're here to remind our communities that time is still up. The time has come to change our current culture to acknowledge the struggles faced by women on university campuses, in the workplace, and in society, to demand accountability and transparency. We must be clear that the policies we put in place dealing with any form of harassment must put survivors first. Perpetrators like Tyndall will no longer be able to hide behind the inequities of the law. The law should protect the victims. To my Trojan family, I stand with you, I see you, I hear you, and I am fighting with you. Again, I want to thank you. Now, here to speak next is Nicole Haynes, a USC track star, highly successful broadcast journalist, and a Tyndall survivor.
Thank you, Assemblymember Reyes. As fellow Trojans, we all thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to share my story with you. During my time at USC, I served as captain of the track and field team, specializing in the heptathlon. I went to the Olympic trials, and in the decade after graduation, became a pro track and field athlete, and later in life, a broadcast journalist, and for a time, covered USC sports. I am a Trojan to the core, and that is what's made coming forward so difficult. In 1995, during my junior year of college, I went to the Student Health Care Center with the worst case of food poisoning I had ever experienced. It was there that I came under the care of Dr. Tyndall, and like so many others, was put through the full ordeal of a vaginal exam for something totally unrelated to my illness. This was also my first gynecological exam, as I had never been to an OBGYN before. I vividly remember that day. I was experiencing the most excruciating stomach pain ever. I thought I was going to die. So when I got to the Student Health Center and they told me to take off my clothes, lay on the table, and put my feet up in the stirrups, I completely complied. I just wanted to figure out what was going on and to get to the bottom of this. So after he was finished with his exam, he came up and told me, "Oh, you have food poisoning. Go home, it'll pass." I couldn't believe that after going through the pain of not only my stomach, but being penetrated for the first time, and it was extremely uncomfortable, that was all I got. No prescription, no lab work, just, it'll pass. Dr. Tyndall violated me. My mom was a victim of sexual abuse, and she constantly pounded in my head, if anybody violates you, speak up. I now have a 4-year-old daughter, and I'm constantly telling her, if anybody touches you inappropriately, if you don't feel comfortable, come tell mommy. Because I know if these predators are not stopped, they will continue to ruin lives. But it wasn't until I started reading about the stories of Dr. Tyndall in the news that my feelings about what happened to me in '95 were validated. I've been to tons of doctor's appointments since college, and for some reason, that one appointment always sat uncomfortably in my stomach. I knew I had to come forward, and not just for me, but for my mom and the hundreds of other women who have sat with their shame, fear, and mistrust because of the abuse they suffered by someone who was supposed to care for them. Yes, I am a Trojan to the core, but I cannot stand by when my university demonstrates an institutional inability to correct its course. The system is not working when this type of abuse is allowed to occur for almost 30 years. The system is broken when good nurses try reporting this horrendous conduct and they are met with inaction, or even worse, a cover-up. The system is broken when the university seems more intent on putting out propaganda against women who suffered the abuses of Dr. Tyndall than fully accepting responsibility. The systemic failure continues when we try to bring our case in a California court and are met with antiquated deadlines and a statute of limitations law that threatens to extinguish our rights and our voice. AB 1510 will give survivors like me and all these ladies up here a chance to hold those who harmed us accountable. It gives us a choice. We can choose our own path to justice. Yes, we are all Trojans, but first and foremost, we are women. We are women who suffered a horrible thing and have waited far too long for justice. AB 1510 gives us that. Like the sign in front of me says, it ensures justice to the survivors. USC and Dr. Tyndall didn't give me a choice years ago. I want my choice now. USC is the only opponent of this bill. So Assembly Member Reyes, thank you so much for the fortitude to stand up to such a powerful institution. From our hearts, we thank you for standing by with us today.
I would like to invite my co-author, Wendy Carrillo, also a Trojan, to say a few words.
Thank you, Assemblymember Reyes. We are in a moment in our nation's history where women are standing up to all kinds of injustice. And as women and as Trojan women, we are here to proudly say no more. What has happened in the past needs to be seen and needs justice. And I'm so honored to be able to join all the women here today and to join Assemblymember Reyes as fellow alumni of USC and hold an institution that we value and hold so dear to our hearts, accountable and responsible for the cover-ups of the past and to ensure that this happens to no one in the future. I commend you ladies for being here, for being present, to being a witness to what's happening now and a witness to your own stories. because they are powerful and you are valid and you are important and you deserve justice. So thank you to you for being here today. And thank you to Assemblymember Reyes for authoring such an important piece of legislation. And fight on.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you all. I stand here today with an army of survivors. More than 600 of George Chindle survivors have come forward. 600. Accusing him of abuse, and yet no charges have been filed. How can this be? What message does it send to survivors, to potential future victims, to abusers? It suggests that sexual abuse is not a priority. In the late 80s, during George Chindle's residency, someone filed a written report of sexual abuse. Since that report, some 30 years ago, numerous others spoke up, but no one listened, and the abuse continued. Those who could have done something made a conscious decision to look the other way and cover it up. They covered up Tyndall's abuse in an effort to protect the financial interests and reputation of the university and themselves. I ask you to imagine how different would the trajectory of all these lives be if just one individual stood up and did the right thing. The many, many survivors, including all who are here with me today, would have never met George Tyndall and would have been spared from the abuse they suffered. The unavoidable fact is the decision to act or to do nothing is a choice that shapes the world and impacts generations. Inaction by law enforcement, USC, and individuals who turned a blind eye empowered this predator to thrive and cause incalculable damage. Those responsible for protecting and caring for students covered it up, shamed survivors, and provided Tyndall with a financial payout. Shame on them. Students should be the heart and soul of any college or university, and those involved in enabling Tyndall's crimes and misdeeds should be held accountable. Abuse that occurs under the guise of medical treatment is destructive, as it isn't just the trust of the doctor that is lost, it's the trust in the system, in your community, and in those upon whom you rely. As a survivor of this type of abuse, I know how confusing it can be, and the guilt that often accompanies the realization that a doctor, someone we're told from an early age to trust and respect, is capable of intentionally harming us. I assumed I was the problem, just as many of the other survivors did. Every time we enter a doctor's office, we rely on his or her education and certification, and we lower our guard. We defer to their opinions and instructions. When they tell you that a certain protocol is necessary, you tend to accept that. When you catch yourself thinking this seems strange and it feels uncomfortable, you are conditioned to rationalize, telling yourself that he is a doctor who treats patients every day. And if there was a problem, someone would have done something about it a long time ago. But of course, this never happens if nobody listens. Without appropriate supervision, being a gynecologist gave George Tyndall better access to victims and a license to abuse. Too often, statutes of limitations fail to account for the complexity of sexual abuse, how it occurs, when it occurs, where it occurs, why it occurs, and the process by which victims of such abuse come to terms with the reality nobody else has been willing to acknowledge. Unless carefully and specifically crafted to account for the unique circumstances of abuse, such statutes disempower victims by stripping them of the ability to take action against their abusers and enablers, effectively perpetuating the cycle of sexual abuse and violence. I have seen victims become survivors by acknowledging the harm they've suffered, recognizing its cause, and taking action to ensure it doesn't happen again. Respectfully, I ask that you appoint a special prosecutor to investigate all contributing causes of this horrific disaster so this can be identified, understood, and prevented from ever happening again. And I ask that you empower the victims of abuse to become survivors of abuse by enacting AB 1510, providing a 1-year window for victims of Tyndall to take action against their abuser and have their day in court. Abuse is not just in the moment. Everyone's story is different, and everyone copes differently. Some feel comfortable coming forward immediately after their abuse. For others, it takes years, and some may never come to terms with it. What all survivors have in common is that the effects of abuse stay with you for the rest of your life. I ask each of you to remember that the survivors you see before you today only needed one adult to stand between them and their abuser. The harm they suffered was as preventable as it was inexcusable. We can't change the past, but you can create a safer future by passing this bill. To everyone in this room today with the power to support the passing of AB 1510, please be that one adult. Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Lucy Chi. I am a 2014 Masters of Health Administration graduate of USC. In 2012, I was sexually abused by George Tyndall. AB 1510, we're talking about 2 years versus 10 years or 3 years. But what I'd really like to talk about today is 28 years. 28 years passed between when the first known victim of George Tyndall reported him and when USC actually took action. USC sheltered this sexual predator for 28 years, allowing him access to tens of thousands of Trojan women. By the time I saw George Tyndall, he had been honing his art of being a sexual predator for 23 years. And he already knew exactly what to say and exactly what to ask to figure out what he could do to me. When he found out I was studying health administration, he got to work right away asking me if I had medical training, if I ever learned the physical exam, if I ever learned or studied the vaginal or rectal exam. And then he abused me. I was 30 years old and a graduate student with medical training. And I didn't understand what happened to me. In the Asian culture, in many Asian cultures and Asian countries, sex education is still taboo. And girls are told from a young age that they don't see a gynecologist until they're married. George Tyndall knew this, and he specifically targeted Asian women that had no idea what was supposed to happen during the gynecological exam. And when I think about what he was able to get away with me, a 30-year-old woman who had seen a gynecologist before, who had medical training, it scares me to think about what he did to those 17, 18-year-old girls, freshmen with no idea what a gynecologist is supposed to do. 6 years passed between when he abused me and when I actually found out what had really happened to me. In those 6 years, I found myself often uncomfortable with men. I found myself distrusting of the whole medical system. I found myself afraid of older men, afraid of doctors. And in my work, I often found myself unable to function when I read about any stories of physician misconduct. I was even afraid of my partner when he tried to be intimate with me. And I actually still am. USC wants you to think that those 6 years that I suffered without knowing what happened, that it doesn't matter. They want you to think that those 28 years that they covered up a sexual predator, that doesn't matter. Please don't let them. I support AB 1510, and I hope you will too.
Okay. Thank you, Assemblywoman Reyes, for putting forward this very important legislation. My name is Audrey Nafziger. I'm a 25-year veteran prosecutor. I work at the Ventura County District Attorney's Office, and I spent more than half of my career prosecuting sexual offenders, hundreds of them, including sexually violent predators. In May of last year, I saw the LA Times article on my phone with my 2 daughters in my car and my husband, and the world fell out underneath me because I couldn't believe for the next 28 years he continued to abuse people at USC. And it's been very hard to come to terms with knowing that it wasn't just me, and he continued to do it. I can confidently say, as a professional in this business, that what Dr. Tyndall has done is unprecedented. He sexually abused me as a first-year law student in 1990, and he told the nurse to leave the room, and he locked the door, and he did things to me, and he took pictures of me. And this year, the Los Angeles Police Department asked me to go find my jewelry and watches and rings so they could identify my body parts by matching them to my rings and my watch from 1990. That is a very difficult thing to do, to go into your jewelry box and try to help police officers who are looking at my vagina. That is not what is supposed to happen at a university health center. And all these women here have their own stories about this abuse. We cannot stand for organizations who stand for sexual predators. USC knew the year before I saw him, there was a written report that called him out, and they knew, and I never had to see him. And this never had to happen, and none of these women had to be here. They have kept their dirty secrets hidden for all this time. And they will not share their information. They even told a federal judge they will not make their internal report public. They're not going to tell what they knew, when they knew it, who knew it. Those are the questions that need to be answered. We know that sexual predators who are allowed to continue in institutional settings always have help. They always have help. As of today, there is no evidence that anyone other than Dr. Tyndall is being investigated. I do want to say that there are more women who will not come forward, and I understand the cycle of shame. I have worked with countless numbers of victims professionally. I understand, and I want them to know it is not their fault. It is not your fault. AB 1510 is important for all of my sisters who suffer in silence and for all of my sisters who have decided to come forward. This is the bill that will hold USC to account for everything that they did and didn't do. This never should have happened. Thank you.
Thank you. I am honored to be here with my fellow sister survivors. All of us here today, we all have a story. We have been victims of abuse, specifically by those with power and authority over us. Forbes says that every 98 seconds an American is sexually assaulted. My authority figure was my doctor. We can all trust doctors, right? Growing up in a small country town, that's what I believed. Dr. Tyndall took advantage of his position to assault and abuse hundreds of unsuspecting and vulnerable young people, myself included, and USC knew about it for decades. And yet, over and over, they did nothing until they were backed into a corner and quietly removed him. They hoped that it would just go away. When the story broke, I was very hopeful that USC's president acknowledged our plight and said, "This is just the beginning," and that full accountability would happen. But instead of accountability, USC protected their brand. USC said they would act quickly and make amends. But here we are today. We have no closure. For all of us, the anxiety, stress, and the many other emotions still plague us. USC needs to be held accountable. They need to provide answers of who knew what, when, and where. They need to give a voice and closure to victims as they had promised. And they need to stop standing in the way as the only opposition to 1510. Instead of doing the right thing, they've hired lobbyists in an effort to block justice. We deserve better from our university. Instead of a concerted effort to use the statute of limitations to minimize their accountability and to do damage control. We were young women. It took most of us years to come to terms with what happened to us in Dr. Tyndall's examination room. And it took a newspaper's expose for us to discover that we were not alone, that there were other victims, in fact, thousands of us. Today, we all have a choice. To do nothing, it is a choice. That's what USC wants us to do. But that would be to side with a sexual predator and his institutional enabler. That would be to allow USC to continue its cover-up. I stand with these women and Assemblymember Gomez Reyes, and I say today, enough is enough. It is time to move forward, and it is time to approve AB 1510. Thank you.
Share your story. Anybody else want to? Thank you.
My name is Lisa Marie Poole Daly, USC class of 1989. I would like to share my story. I went to see Dr. Tyndall to get put on birth control. I had never been to a gynecological exam before, and to this day, I've never experienced what I experienced that day. 30 years. To be more specific, I was humiliated, shamed by sitting in an exam room, naked, on the table, near a window that was open. I was internally and externally palpitated to the point of pain. And when I asked this doctor at what point in the exam that he planned on putting on a pair of gloves, is when he really gave it to me. He penetrated my vagina with I don't even know what, but I can still feel the sharp edges of the object that he inserted in me. I can feel the cramping still. And then, with no warning, he rammed his fingers up my anus. And I screamed and started crying, and I looked for the chaperone. And I found her, and I made eye contact with her, and she turned her head away from me. And when I made eye contact with the doctor, he chuckled, and he said, "We have to do that every once in a while." I haven't been for a gynecological exam in 10 years. The only time I've ever been is to have my babies, and now they're graduating from college. I blocked this memory out, and on the day that this story broke, it all came back. My brain protected me from this pain, but it was time. It was time for me to face it because I've faced many. My life has not been easy. And I'm not blaming it on this, but I'm sure that it had a little bit to do with the way my life went. Thank you again. I can't even tell you. This has been very healing for me. Thank you all, my sisters. And this is the first time I've shared this. And I'm glad I did.
Good afternoon. My name is Allison Rowland. I did a master's and a PhD at USC. Graduated in about 1997. George Tyndall lured me into his office by telling me that a pap smear I had had a few days earlier had come back abnormal. When a woman hears that, it's terrifying. An abnormal pap smear, sounds like cervical cancer. And that's what he led me to believe when I did go into that examination. That he claimed wrongly that I had a sexually transmitted disease, what we call now HPV, and he told me I would likely get cervical cancer. He wanted to take pictures of me. I don't know whether I let him or not. He wanted me to come back every 6 months so he could examine me again, and I refused. I was lucky. I was older than most of the women here when I experienced this monster. But I will tell you how grateful I am to all these brave women who come, to the attorneys, to obviously Assemblymember Reyes, who is willing to hold USC to account for harboring this predator all these years. It is unthinkable that someone like this was protected by people who knew better. This was an employee. I complained about him. I know other women complained about him. They didn't listen. They didn't want to listen. They want to treat us like we don't matter. We're here to try to help explain that we do matter. And I hope that with support for Assemblymember Reyes's bill, we can make sure that USC understands that. Thank you.
I want to thank all of you, first for being here, for standing because you represent so many of the other women who are not here, who couldn't be here or who are too ashamed to be here. You are their voice, and I thank you so much. And for those of you who spoke and who painstakingly shared your story, thank you, because this is what everybody needs to know, that there are people who were affected by this man. We know that these are personal and painful stories that have been shared. It's a painful topic. But because you all stand here and we stand here together, we know that something good can happen from this. Students deserve better. They trust their doctor. They trust the university that sends them to that doctor. They deserve better. You all deserve better. I want to join with my Trojan family, with all of you, to foster an environment of safety. I want you to know that I stand with you, and I'm looking forward to the governor signing AB 1510 to provide you all with that extra window of 1 year to be able to ask for your rights, demand your rights, and demand justice. I stand with you. Thank you. Yes.
Assemblymember Reyes, can you explain how your bill specifically will provide additional protections for victims that they don't have today?
They will have 1 year. As of now, when we know that Dr. Tyndall had 30 years, 14,000 women that were affected by him. For many of them, the statute of limitations is already passed. But this will provide a 1 year window so that the women who are the victims will be able to file their lawsuit. If they want to join the class action suit, they have that option. But this will extend it 1 year for them.
From the 3 years now?
It'll extend it 1 year, beginning January 1st of next year.
So the statute of limitations is currently 3 years, this would make it 4?
The statute of limitations is currently 1 year.
So this will make it 2?
Potentially, it'll make it 2, but for many of them, they have 0 time to file their lawsuit because the statute of limitations is already passed. Any other questions?
Amanda Davis, D-A-V-I-S. Amanda Davis, D-A-V-I-S. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much.
This room is not built to hold this many people.